Welcome, one and all, to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm Connor. That's Phil.
Hello.
And, so much good stuff to talk to you about today. Phil and I both watched Kyoji Horiguchi versus Sergio Pettis 2, and I thought it was good.
Yeah.
I feel you were saying to me, you had a slightly different opinion. You thought it was, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely watched it, and that was what I said.
All right, well, enough on that. Let's get into the other things that we're going to be covering on this week's episode. Guess what? It's UFC cards. Sorry, folks. Did you see, by the way, Phil? Well, first let me say, we have a good main event coming up next weekend. Flyweight main event. Taira, Alex Perez, somehow making his third appearance in the octagon in this calendar year. Somehow perhaps being related to the discontinued existence of USADA. Last weekend we had a middleweight main event, which really should be setting, could have set Perez-Taira up for a title shot, didn't. He fought Nasruddin Imavov. There was some other crazy action on that card. We're going to talk about that. This next week's card is in the Apex. And I wanted to ask you, Phil, did you see the screen shots that there was like a WWE event in the Apex last weekend? Did you see?
Yes. Yeah, I have seen that.
They had like 400 people in there.
I guess.
They had a couple hundred at least. I mean, it looked like when they have like a boxing show in like the Brooklyn Theater or whatever. Like, it looked like a fight for the troops size audience. What the?
Wouldn't you rather it look like a sort of just have that sort of deserted meat market vibe, or the idea that you're like watching a dress rehearsal for an actual fight? Oh, you would rather have the vibe we've got for the Apex at the moment.
I was just blew me away that they did that. Somebody else used the same facility, and you're like, let's put some stands in here. Put some people. Let's light the crowd too. Something they basically don't do at any UFC shows. They do it on boxing shows, and it's great. It feels like there's a ton of people watching. Yeah,
I guess. Or you could just make it look like it's tough. Just make it look as much like tough fights as possible, like they do for the Apex shows.
Well, that is presumably what we're going to be. I mean, I'm literally on my screen right now is Perez-Taira versus Carlos Hernandez, which was at the Apex, and I'm just literally looking out at a sea of dark and empty seats. A sea is maybe a pond of dark and empty seats. Why aren't there people there? What's the point? You can sell tickets.
Be a hassle, Connor.
You know you can sell the tickets, right? You get money for them. And it makes the show better. It's win-win.
No, it isn't, because I just explained why. It's a hassle.
It's just an ass ache, really.
Yeah. That's sort of how a lot of, I believe, the modern UFC works, is that you can hide, the fabled deficiencies that TKO have been driving from the top down through their acquisitions.
Yeah.
The quest for efficiencies and for slimming down and for all that other kind of, corporate bullshit stuff. Is that, like any sort of top-down mandate in history, is that it can provide you with a nice cloak to do other stuff. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I believe it is, as you said, half-arsing it. Like, you know what? I don't want to sell tickets. It seems lame. I don't want to have people coming in. I'd just like to run this, and then we'll pick up the money from ESPN, and then we'll go home.
Yeah.
And then we'll have some fighters ready to put in to fill the spots on main cards if we need them. And yeah, that's it.
I mean, I watched that card last weekend, and like the difference could not be more stark. Just the amount of energy that was in the building. I think the fighters can feel it too. Like, it just is a much, much more enjoyable experience. There was a certain novelty to the Apex when it started, but it's like if like Japanese crowds were terrible. Cause the thing with like the Pride crowd is that they were all like deathly quiet, but they still reacted in a crowdly way when something happened. So you got the best of both. Get to hear all the feet sweeping across the canvas, and you got to hear the shots landing in the corners. Didn't even have to shout to be heard. But then shit would start popping off, and the arena would explode. And even if they're going to be loud the whole time, which they largely were last weekend, it's just so much better. I don't know. I don't know. It was just finding out that they could be packing at least a few hundred people into the Apex if they bothered to. And they just don't.
They don't.
They just don't. I don't know.
Efficiencies, he says, as he leans back in his chair and pulls his cap over his eyes.
That's right. What's more efficient than a nice little nap? All right. Well, we do have some good fights to talk about. As I said, coming up next weekend, Tatsuro Taira, Alex Perez. Pretty big test, I would say, for Taira. He basically comes up against the same challenge that Muhammad Mokaev just barely passed. And what do you make of first of all, Alex Perez also did not look as good in that one. I think he was definitely rusty and looked better prepared and sharper and more typically aggressive in his last appearance against Matthews Nicolau. So what do you make of Taira and his chances against either of those versions of Alex Perez, I suppose?
This feels like too much too soon in a way which even, I think did we both pick against Mokaev? I can't remember. Maybe not.
I cannot remember.
But anyway, Perez was a rough style matchup in many ways for Mokaev, in that he can handle himself on the feet, and he's big, and he's good at wrestling, and so on. But I think he was, to more of an extent, particularly, he was to more of an extent a natural progression for Mokaev, right? Is that Taira has been fighting sort of entry-level UFC competition and maybe a bit above that.
Yeah.
And then is jumping right to Alex Perez, who is simply, he's just gatekeeper tier.
Yeah,
he is
a fringe contender.
Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, Mokaev, at the very least, went from Cody Durden,
right,
and then fought Tim Elliott, and then fought Alex Perez, and you're like, oh yeah, well, he's getting steadily harder versions of tough style matchups, whereas Taira is being tossed right in the deep end, jumping 3 steps straight to Alex Perez.
Yeah, to go from Carlos Hernandez, Edgar Chairez, Jesus Aguilar, CJ Vergara, none of these are bad fighters, but they are very much the kind of guys you would fully expect a talented prospect to beat. And indeed, Taira, in fact, he actually had quite a bit of trouble in at least the Chairez fight. Simply because, it was a fight where he had free takedowns and top control, and that's largely how he won. It was also the first time he fought somebody who had reach and height to match his, and he looked profoundly uncomfortable on the feet. So he is still very much in the figuring out what people can do to him phase of his career. He's 24 years old. He's 15-0. He's clearly very, very good, very talented, good athlete, and just a really, really skilled grappler. I mean, he has some of the prettiest back takes in the UFC right now. Solid wrestling game to get to his like positional grappling. Really, really good defense on the ground, which has come in handy a couple of times. But I just don't think he's, I mean, I tend to agree. I just don't think he's a finished product yet. And however shaky Perez may have looked against Mokaev, I mean, yeah, let's put it that way. Mokaev was like scraping by better fighters than Taira has ever faced. And I think he sort of benefited from having a very rusty looking Perez to fight. That if it had been the Alex Perez who came back and fought Nicolau, Mokaev probably would have just lost.
Yeah, the margins were extremely thin.
And Perez basically solved him as a wrestling and grappling threat. It was simply that he forgot to keep landing strikes while doing that. So, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a particularly complicated pick for me just because of the experience difference. That, like, Taira can hit some great takedowns, nice timing on a double, you know. Like as I said, good submission defense on the ground, but I have also seen him, like, get taken down himself and get controlled. He got beaten up pretty bad in the first round by CJ Vergara. Again, not a bad fighter, but not Alex Perez. And then while he did some work on the feet in his last fight against Carlos Hernandez, I'm not really sure how convincing that was. If he runs into the problem of simply not being able to get to his A game. You know, he was in there against a small, shall we say, uncertain striker in Carlos Hernandez. And once again benefited from the thing he did not have in his toughest striking fight against Chairez, which was a reach advantage. A substantial one.
Yep. Yeah, I think I tend to agree. I mean, this is, as I said, like, Mokaev's big jump up was Tim Elliott, and a lot of people, like, quite justifiably, well, not a lot of people, but I think a few people, like, quite justifiably, like, picked Tim Elliott to beat him simply because Mokaev's game had looked so non-functional. But there were two things that sort of helped him there, which is that, Mokaev is just incredibly gritty, as we've said many times, but also that, like, Tim Elliott is one of those guys who is quite a potent offensive wrestling threat and just a really bad takedown defender.
Yeah.
Definitely in the sort of John Fitch school of much more dangerous offensively than he is defensively. But yeah, like the Chairez fight, I think it just shows you how bad this could be for Taira unless he's taken some giant leap up in his striking ability. Because essentially you saw that he's trying to build a sustainable game on the low feet, a sustainable game on the feet. And that's mostly sort of trying to, like, throw low kicks at range.
Yeah, he's got, you know, good straight right hand, good solid kicks. It's not like he won't have, to be clear, it's not like he won't have a significant reach advantage here. I think it's like 5 inches or something like that.
Really? That much? I always think of Perez as, like, he's a very big flyweight.
He's thick, but he is in fact an inch shorter and has 4.5 reach disadvantage. 70 inch.
I don't imagine it's going to look that bad.
Well, I mean, this is what I'm saying. Like, just because I'm pointing out that Taira once again benefited from the reach advantage that allowed his striking to look good against Hernandez, that was against Carlos Hernandez. I'm not sure how extremely dependent you can be on having a reach advantage to solve all of your problems like susceptibility to pressure and lackluster defense and inability to put combinations together. Lack of feints. You know, I'm not sure how well you can rely on reach to sort of brush over these problems against somebody like Perez, who like can pressure, can throw combinations, will take a shot to give one back, and will threaten you and will punish you with like a well-rounded attacking game. Go for a low kick.
I think also it's the fact that like if Taira tries to run a sort of slightly slow-paced range game, like largely like trading low kicks, is that Perez will chew him up doing that. As long as he's not too terrified of the takedown.
Yeah.
Which again, I think is, as you said, is at least partially due to a confidence and ring rust issue, right? Is that he certainly should be able to do this. Because we have seen him do it against, you know.
Oh, yeah.
We have, let's say, I mean, admittedly, it was against a much, much smaller flyweight from basically another generation of flyweights, but we have seen Alex Perez, like, badly kick up a back-taking wizard and control them from the outside before, when he beat, what's his face? Poor,
Formiga.
Formiga, yeah. He is a dangerous and powerful low kicker, and basically has a good jab and low kick, and at range he is quite potent.
Yep.
And I'm not sure if I trust Taira's ability to just like go for shots as much as I trust Makayev's. Like Makayev at least has the Makayev, might be shooting from his butt a lot of the time, but he is at least constantly shooting, which stopped Perez from like trying to low kick him too much.
Yeah, and it did. Even that, it did. I guess that's the question: is like how much of Perez's lackluster offensive output was like in general a product of the takedown threat he had to deal with, because he did get taken down early. And then he had to solve that. He had to sniff out the timing on Makayev's entries. He had to refocus himself on, getting to good grips and stopping the takedowns before they could really get rolling. How much of his inability to do that while continuing to pile the striking on was ring rust versus just something that maybe happens when his opponent continually threatens the takedown. But the point stands that Taira is a bit of a pot shotter with his takedowns too. I just don't really see a lot of connectivity or cohesiveness in Taira's game, like strategically. I think he remains a very sort of opportunistic, planless fighter a lot of the time.
I mean, weirdly enough, he is a fighter that I think probably has a slightly higher potential ceiling than like a Makayev.
Yeah.
Simply like more potent everywhere when it comes to, submission offense, like on the feet. He just looks more dangerous. You can see, there are a bunch of potential futures for this guy where he could be something like a Charles Oliveira, or he could be, maybe a slightly more controlled fight version of that. But, he could be genuinely dangerous. But it is one of those things where, like, I feel like he has less of a hard cap on his ceiling than Makayev, but in part that has led him to being less focused on what wins him fights, because he's trying to build himself out eventually towards being, a top fighter, which means that he is trying to be, he is spending long periods of time on the feet with his opponents. He is trying to be a good range striker. Whereas Makayev is simply knows that he wins fights like essentially one way, or he scares them off with that one way. He's much more focused at this point. But yeah, I think that lack of focus in Taira's game means I sort of just have to pick Perez.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think Taira has a potential to be a trickier takedown threat. You know, he can tack on some nice layers, get to a leg, drive somebody to the fence, take them the other way with like a foot sweep or a trip. Like, there's a little more depth to that than Mukhayev's like endless shooting from the knees, ending up in like a losing scramble and then working his way out of it. Damian Maia wrestling school. But I just think it was an incredibly consistent fight from Mukhayev, for better or for worse. He was plugging away with the takedown threat, and when it stopped working, he continued plugging away with his strikes. And largely ineffectual as they were, he had essentially like neutered Alex Perez's output. So he had neutralized him. So I don't see that level of consistency in Taira's game. Again, I watch a lot of long portions of his fights. It's not entirely clear what his goal is.
Yeah.
What is he setting the opponent up for? He's just kind of moving around and like waiting for them to make a mistake.
Yeah, I think he is fighting people and eventually waiting for the point where he will be winning because he's just more potent and he's more potent, more dangerous, and generally more athletic than they are. And that isn't necessarily going to be the case in the future. He's either going to fight people who are as potent as him, or he's going to be fighting people who are simply more structured towards winning fights.
Yeah. All right, well, both of us picking Perez. Continuing to fight. I mean, whatever the cause, I'm glad to see it. He's a good fighter. It was very much a shame when he was held out for so long, and looks like he's regaining his form. So should be a good one. God knows it'll be a big deal if Taira beats him. Like that will immediately vault him into fringe contender status himself. On the other hand, I think it could still be very useful. I mean, you can criticize it saying it's a big step up, but it could also be the kind of, he's been feasting on worse fighters and not really making any market improvements. Maybe he needs to get pantsed by a tough, strong veteran to find out what direction he needs to take his game in. We'll see.
Yeah. And I will say, it's probably going to be one of those ones where it's got at least some. It should be enjoyable, if not like super relevant, because at least this card is largely packed with like lighter weight fighters, even if they're not ones people might necessarily have heard of, and at least it's headlined by a flyweight. At least it's going to be just a cool show that you could put on, like, and just sit down and watch, and it'll just be, like, reasonably entertaining because these are good divisions.
On the other hand, I'm pissed about that because why are you putting all the good divisions on a fucking Apex card? Put these people in front of a crowd. Put a crowd in the Apex. All right. You can do it. I don't know. That made me so upset when I saw that. There's people in there. Look at all those people. I love the Fight for the Troops cards, Phil. They're great. Having the small room packed with enthusiastic fans is a great vibe. It's like seeing
enthusiastic fans who are extra hungry for blood.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. But even without having literal agents of the state in the audience, it's great to see a band in like a packed bar room. That's a good vibe for a show, and you can do that with fight nights too. I just do not know why they don't do that. Anyway.
All this stuff you're saying sounds like a lot of effort.
Literally, they'd make money from it. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Perez-Cannonier and Nasruddin Imavov, however it's pronounced. We are also going to talk about one more fight from this Perez-Taira card later on, that being Tiger Ulanbekov versus Joshua Van. talk about hot flyweight prospects. Joshua Van looks like he has a ton of potential. So that's another good little guy fight on this card, buried on this card, in the tomb that is the Apex Center. And we'll pick up whatever else we can from the Cannonier Imavov undercard after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Jared Cannonier, Nasruddin Imavov fought in the main event last weekend. Where was this card at? I don't remember. All I know is that it was
KFC UFC.
Oh, that's right. It was in Louisville.
Yeah.
Which Zane Simon hilariously pronounced Louisville. You believe that? I don't know, fucking dunce.
Crazy.
I know. You got to back me up on this one, Phil. You guys have the craziest fucking town names. There's a place called Toaster over there, and it's not spelled like it sounds.
So yeah, we do have a lot. We'd like to pack a lot of crazy into a very small area over here.
Worcestershire. Jared Cannonier. We were talking last week about how Cannonier is like probably the third best middleweight in the division. And he goes out there, and then he goes out there and embarrasses us. He goes out there. He failed to wear his UFC-sponsored Evil Eye Prevention amulet.
Yep.
And he got dusted, albeit in a pretty strange stoppage. There was another, standing stoppage, I think, on this card by Jason Herzog, which I thought was good. This one was a little rushed, if you ask me. I mean, how did you feel about the end of this fight?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty bad. I am typically a fan of, quote-unquote early stoppages.
Right.
Especially, potential violent ones.
Yeah.
Anytime people are I mean, if it's a rear naked choke or whatever, I don't particularly care. But most of the time when people are like, oh, that stoppage was early, I'm like, no, it wasn't. You have to do your best to look like you are not being finished. If you look like you are being finished at any point, it's okay for the ref to step in.
Yeah.
But that being said, I thought this one sucked.
Very early. I mean, Cannonier was definitely hurt, but he was very active and trying to defend himself and trying to recover. I mean, you can't ask for any more. He was doing everything it seemed like he needed to be doing to not have the fight stopped yet, basically.
Yep. He wasn't staggering around the cage, off the ropes. I mean, you compare this to Tyson Fury against Alexander Usyk, where that was someone just reeling around the ring as opposed to the cage.
Yeah.
He just looked moderately hurt, and then they called it off, and I was like, what is this the lethal finishing power of Nasruddin Imavov that is prompting you to do this?
Yeah. I thought you were going to say something else. I thought you were going to say some real MMA fan shit there. What is this, the ultimate pussy championship? I really felt you gearing up for some macho shit like that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It made the whole thing pretty dispiriting in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah. I actually thought I thought it was a fairly interesting fight up to that point, actually. I mean, in a way that made me...
That's one of the ways in which it was dispiriting.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, okay, the first one, obviously, is that Jared Cannonier is one of those guys who has had an absurdly difficult path to, to get back to a title shot, because he had a title shot against Adesanya. Mm-hmm. But, they've obviously sidelined him in favor of all the people who can say stupid, racist or borderline racist stuff. And can just, I guess, get people excited. The Duplessis and the Stricklands and so on. And that Cannonier is obviously, just not someone that they're interested in having in the picture whatsoever. So he's just been having to fight tough people. And this has destroyed that. And again, I believe he was up 2-1 on all the judges' scorecards when this happened.
Yeah, it did. So, the momentum had shifted, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he picked up the first two.
But, this is the end of that, and also, it's the Nastin Imavov is not like the world's greatest finisher kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, the other part of it is that it sours what was actually a really impressive performance from Nastin Imavov. Mm-hmm. And one that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Because if there was anything that you would say about this fight going in, which we did. Actually, did we? Maybe we didn't even bother. But if there's anything you would say about this fight, it's that Imavov might start off well, controlling Cannonier. He's bigger. He's, got faster hand speed. But that we've seen him sort of run out of ideas in fights, and we've seen him get gassed out a bit, and that Cannonier is just a hulking, indestructible force who's going to gradually shove him out of the fight, as he did to, Sean Strickland, for example. Mm-hmm. And that just wasn't what happened. Instead, it was Cannonier who came out and had, strong early rounds, and it was Imavov who seemed to be picking up on what Cannonier was doing, and, doing better as the fight went on. He was starting to, piece his combinations together more. He was starting just to be able to work off his jab, and he was starting to see Cannonier's 1-2s, and all that other kind of stuff, is that it sours, it ruins both Cannonier's title hopes, but then it doesn't even make a contender out of it, because you're just not even technically winning that fight. It was, even if they gave you that round, it wasn't enough for a 10-8, and not even under generous scoring. And the best you could say is that it was a draw at that point. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So dispiriting.
Yeah, I think it certainly looked like Imavov was going to be gassed after the first round. He was in his corner just sucking wind, he looked in a bad way. I think huge credit to him for holding it together. Definitely staging a convincing comeback. En route to the early finish. I mean, it's very likely a fight he would have successfully come back to win anyway. So, I mean, possibly would have finished Cannonier. He had him badly hurt. He just wasn't really finishing him quite yet. It was close, could have, who knows? 10 seconds later, could have been a stoppage where I'm like, oh, great stoppage. Imavov was definitely all over him. Yeah, I got a couple things to say about this. I mean, first of all, I kind of resented the way that Imavov started to win this, to be honest. I thought it was pretty crude. And I mean, fair enough. In addition to everything else it is, a fight is a test of wills. And if you can go in there and say, I'm simply not going to let you back me up, I'm simply going to keep coming forward more. I mean, how many times do I ask a fighter to do this? For example, Paulo Costa the weekend before against Sean Strickland. I'm like, just don't back up. And this fight will become so much easier for you. That's really what Imavov did here. Like, he was kind of getting pieced up early. He still had the problem of any time Cannonier wanted to clinch him, he basically just sat with his ass against the fence, clueless as to how to get out of that position. Exactly like how he lost to Phil Halls, exactly how he managed to look completely unimpressive despite beating Roman Dolidze. But he also just like insisted on coming forward and throwing more than one punch. And I can't blame him for it feeling a little lackluster to me entirely, because I also thought, I think he successfully exploited like a problem we've talked about Cannonier having for ages, which is a lot of ideas, no real idea of how to connect them to each other, no real consistency. And like, again, what is the plan in this fight for Jared Cannonier? Ultimately, his corner was telling him, like, you need to use the double jab to come forward. They were constantly telling him to move his feet. Look, I usually am very complimentary of John Crouch as a coach and a cornerman. All I heard them say to Jared Cannonier when he was losing this fight because of the pressure of Imavov was that he needs to move his feet. And the number of times I watched Cannonier awkwardly crab walking to the right in a very novice-like attempt to deal with Imavov's right hand, I'm like, you got to say something more than move your feet. Like, what angles is he supposed to be finding? Why isn't he pivoting? Why does nobody know how to pivot? Where is the positional boxing in these MMA fighters' games? And I think Cannonier's footwork massively let him down in this fight. Because basically his only way to keep moving his feet was, in effect, to give ground to the guy who was only starting to beat him because he was being allowed to pressure. And if you can't change angle without giving ground, you're going to lose to pressure fighters. This is why coming forward simply wins in MMA. Whereas that is not the case in boxing. You don't just automatically win because you come forward more than the other guy in boxing. It's still a great, viable idea, but there are a lot of ways to be the matador, and you can't win a fucking bullfight if you run away from the bull. You know, it doesn't work. So yeah, I thought, in a way, Cannonier really kind of, I'm not saying he did it willingly. He just didn't know any better, but he really made Imavov's very blunt, crude form of pressure fighting a lot more effective than it should have been. Credit to Imavov. He basically like broke Cannonier's will to an extent, because earlier on, Imavov would step in and throw something, and then he has a really bad habit of just sort of loafing around in range after he strikes. He just kind of,
I think because his hand speed is so shocking for so many of the people that he fights that he's just like, there, how was that?
Yeah, he just kind of swaggers around. He really relaxes. He drops his hands. He will leave his stance. He just kind of is like, yeah, I've made my point kind of attitude. And Cannonier was just nailing him earlier on for doing that. But Cannonier's lack of consistency, the fact that he didn't just stick a jab out every single time one of these opportunities was presented, and I mean every time, because it worked whenever he did it. He kept trying to cook up different ideas. And then the fact that he just didn't want to hang around in range like throwing combinations with Imavov, so he just ultimately ended up conceding more and more ground. Backpedaling and sidestepping is not the best way of changing angles on a guy who is walking you down. It's really quite easy to cut off the cage against somebody who circles, moves laterally, rather than somebody who like pivots, who cuts angles. Am I making myself clear to the listeners what the distinction is? When you cut an angle with a pivot, you do not get further away from the person that you are evading. That's the key difference. You don't create space. You create the feeling of space for them because suddenly they're punching at a target that's not there and they have to reset their feet. But you are close enough to hit them. That's why you pivot. If all you do is sidestep, you are essentially giving ground. You're creating more and more space. And it's just way easier for the guy coming forward to cover that space than it is for you as the guy retreating to continue creating it. So yeah, I thought this was a very crude solution by Imavov, but a massive technical gap that was exploited from Cannonier.
Also, yeah, Cannonier sort of galloping sideways, occasionally just lined his feet up, offering like the plane of his body to Imavov, which is pretty much exactly what happened when the knockout happened. Is that
gets turned side on, trying to like backpedal more efficiently, and creates a very weak angle. Yep.
So yeah, I mean, as I said, it's kind of a dispersing one because I think Cannonier is if nothing else an incredibly mentally strong fighter and was denied his chance to try and pull it back after what he might have thought had been a fight that he was doing okay in.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly know that he's incredibly mentally durable.
Oh, yeah.
And he would have been offered that chance. But also, there's the chance to see like Imavov have a genuine standout performance over a competitor, even if it was one that sort of brought forward some of the flaws in, the technical flaws that Cannonier has. I mean, it's middleweight, right?
Mm-hmm. Where
we can't talk too much about technical flaws being a massive anchor to carry around if Drikas is our current champion.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I'm just looking at the knockout again. I'll try to describe the footwork here. Cannonier, they're in the middle of the cage. So Cannonier has all the room he could possibly want to run around in. First, he steps in and does this awkward slip to his left, and then tries to sidestep, but because he's sideways, he is moving straight back. Mm-hmm. So that is literally not lateral movement. Your body might be moving sideways, but relative to your opponent, you are doing a straight line retreat while presenting the side of your face. Then Imavov closes in on him. He slips and does the same circling movement the other way towards his right. And then he steps in trying to throw a 3-2 or a jab, something. But because he's coming from the side, he steps straight across. This is not an angle. This is you squaring up. And there's times when you need to do that, to land your right hand or to land your left hook, but it's very situational, and you really, really need the cover of your jab, at least the present threat of your jab, to get to those positions safely. This is why you throw 1-2s. I know John Kavanaugh is listening, and he's very upset to hear that, but this is actually why you throw 1-2s, because it allows you to safely get the right hand off. It doesn't just set it up. It secures your what is essentially a weak position, where you're stepping offline and squaring yourself to the opponent to line up the right hand. And Cannonier, I don't even think he's trying to throw a right hand. He just, coming from Imavov's left, steps all the way across to his right in a very square position, and then tries to, desperately backpedal. Imavov just nails him with a right hand. Just big positional shortcomings there. And I'm happy to point this out because in our next segment, we're going to talk about that Joshua Van fight. I'd also like to talk at least briefly about the most meaningful fight on this last weekend's undercard, which was Daniel Marcos versus John Castaneda. Daniel Marcos, a very promising, very solid up-and-comer, who I think actually excels as a positional fighter. And it's why he keeps winning fights where maybe if you're looking for some kind of electric appeal, you're not seeing why he's so good. And if you pay attention to his positioning and his maintenance of distance, you realize that it's just a nightmare to fight him. It actually just sucks because you can't get to him easily. like you can basically every other MMA fighter. So we'll explore the idea of footwork and positioning more in the next segment. Let's cut this one here. And when we come back, Joshua Van versus Tagir Ulanbekov and Daniel Marcos-Castaneda after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Some good ones to talk about here. We like good fights. I do anyway. Phil, I don't know about you.
Yeah, I'm just there. I'll just watch whatever.
Phil's a huge Marvel fan, by the way, in case anybody wasn't aware of that.
I love them.
Loves Marvel, loves Star Wars, all the Star Wars stuff. He's been in hog heaven because he just watches whatever.
Yep. That's a good point, actually. Mindweb wasn't my favorite. I like all of them equally. They're all equally as good.
So, next up we have Joshua Van versus Tagir Ulanbekov. And, Joshua Van is a really good looking prospect. He's really
pretty handsome.
he's a pretty good looking guy too. But as a fighter, he's clearly got something. He is very fast, very powerful, and what has impressed me more than anything is his ability to sort of figure his opponents out. They may not be the most sophisticated plans that he comes up with, but the guy is like, what is he, like 23, 24?
Mm-hmm.
And has only had like 10 fights or something like that, 11 fights. He shows an ability beyond his years to adjust. That fight with Felipe Bunez was not easy for him at first. Actually, maybe I'm thinking of the fight with Borjas. Was not easy at first. Got into a lot of messy exchanges. Had to figure out not only how to pressure, but how to pressure and draw out the punches that were connecting on him, defend them, and counter them. And that's something you usually expect to see from somebody with a little more seasoning. Now he's got a pretty tough test on his hands in Tagir Ulanbekov. If nothing else, Ulanbekov is, I think, 2 inches taller and has a 5-inch reach advantage, on which basically his whole striking style is built. And Joshua Van he's a little dude. So this is a whole new kind of challenge for an impressive but still very young and very inexperienced fighter.
Yeah. I think, as I was saying, I think Tagir Ulanbekov he's a little bit like Steve Erceg without the class.
Yeah.
If you took Steve Erceg's game back to its most basic principles of like, I'm going to hit you from a long way away, that would be Tagir Ulanbekov.
I gotta say, you said that to me before, and I say Steve Erceg without the class. You may as well just say any other tall fighter, because like that is kind of the thing that sets Steve Erceg apart. Is that he's a very well schooled. Speaking of people who actually understand like the positional tenets of how to box with somebody, how to change angles, how to counter, and just how to outmaneuver somebody on the feet. That is Steve Erceg. So without that, what is he? He's Giga Chikadze.
There are a lot of MMA fighters out there who are like tall and have like don't even have the first principle.
That's true.
Having
That's true.
A long range box. Like there's many of them where it's like, I'm going to wait for you to fall into the clinch.
Yeah.
Or I'm just going to throw out a whole bunch of long range kicks.
That's true.
And
I suppose I would be more insulted if you said that, say, Abus Magomedov is Steve Erceg without the class. Because I'd be like, no, they're nothing alike except for the frame. So fair enough. Ulanbekov uses his jab. He throws 1-2s. He's got that going for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, like, I think he's, again, sort of similar in his game construction in that he's an enthusiastic wrestler who perhaps shouldn't necessarily be doing that quite as much as he is. Another sort of common factor with Steve Erceg. It's like his fight with, like, Tim Elliott, for example. Mm-hmm. This was one where he was, like, he's not, like, inaccurate or anything. He was able to tag Tim Elliott up a bunch. Tim Elliott's always been someone who sort of gallops from side to side and then gets punched in the face. But yeah, Ulanbekov kind of kept going for takedowns on him. But that didn't work, and that's not particularly like a good sign, because, as I said before, Tim Elliott is not actually very good at defending takedowns.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so mostly we have like an enthusiastic but ineffectual takedown threat, and the sort of bare bones of a like tall man striking game, which basically means that, whilst, as you said, like Van just doesn't have like easy fights with people.
Yeah.
He always, they always kind of get in there and are on him early. I mean, you can see why also he's a darling of people who, who have watched his fights, because he's like, he has fights that have approximately the same kind of shape as like Piotr Jan's used to.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you are seeing someone figuring out his opponents in real time and doing it in an extremely violent way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, broadly, you just got to expect him to eventually just start doing what he did to Bunez, I think, in what was his last fight, and just
Bunez was also taller than him, longer than him.
Yeah, exactly. Just pushing him back into the cage and just beating him up to the body and head. I think Ulanbekov looks pretty tough. I don't know if Van's going to be able to finish him, but yeah, I think no reason to expect this to not have the Joshua Van shape, which is weirdly struggling a little bit too, perhaps a little bit too much early, and then just kind of thrashing him in round 3.
Yeah, it would be nice to see him as he continues to develop, to age, to gain a little more like flexibility in his approach. Like, you can be the shorter guy and not necessarily just have to be crowding and pressuring your opponent the whole time. If that's what he feels comfortable doing, and it seems he does, and that just keeps working for him, then fine. It's not like he's going out there like getting blown out in these first rounds. He's just really putting himself in the fire. But not super recklessly. He's just being aggressive, saying, show me what you got. I'm going to keep pressuring you. I'm going to make you show me what you got. And then I'm going to start to deal with it. And I'm going to deal with it largely by continuing to pressure, slipping and countering. I'm going to hit you to all the targets that are available. He's a very good body puncher. And eventually break you. And yeah, Ulanbekov, as I said, he throws combinations. He does actually effectively use his reach, but not having the class of Steve Erceg means that when the opponent penetrates that field created by your reach advantage, you tend to end up in really messy, difficult fights. Like, for example, Ulanbekov's fight with Cody Durden, which was an absolute shit show. Where they're just like smashing their heads together and colliding, and simply because Durden insists on throwing at the same time as Ulanbekov, he is not using his jab to take a small step to the side and then complete a pivot and then strike from that angle, He's not using his jab to like patiently waiting for the opponent to overcommit, stepping in and then spearing them with it and then resetting. Like he's just like throwing it out there when they're in range. It's a much simpler mechanism than what Steve Erceg is doing out there with his lead hand. And so yeah, I just don't really know outside of the wrestling, which I think Van has proven pretty good at dealing with. Even when he does get taken down, he rarely gets controlled for very long. Outside of that, I'm not really sure what Ulanbekov has to stop Van from just mounting the pressure on him as the fight goes on.
So, yeah, tend to agree.
Should be a good one.
It's a tough one for him.
Yeah, should be a good fight.
It's well booked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfectly reasonable matchmaking. Speaking of which, my favorite card going in and to watch play out from last weekend's lineup was Daniel Marcos versus John Castaneda. Marcos' previous fight was his first step up. He fought Davy Grant. And it was a somewhat controversial win. Probably no longer because I doubt anyone remembers it. But it was a close fight. I actually felt like it was a perfectly valid decision for Marcos to get. But it felt a lot closer than it needed to because Marcos is, young and inexperienced. And it was one of those fights where he had all the right answers and didn't really go to them with the consistency that he could have. Like a lot of young guys, he just got bored of the stuff that was working, it seemed. And kept wanting to build, not able to recognize that the simple stuff that was working was just going to keep working and to keep plugging away. Namely, it was the jab, the pivot jab. Davy Grant would come in, he would swing some wild shit. Marcos showed very good defense, both by just keeping a nice guard and parrying punches well, but also just keeping himself in good positions. But he just kept trying to cook something up rather than just sticking the defenseless Davy Grant in the face with a jab that was landing hard and clean every time he threw it. Still, I think a win that was deserved and showed both his potential and his continuing development. So I was very curious to see how he would look against John Castaneda, a very scrappy fighter who I have a lot of respect and appreciation for. And I thought Marcos handled him very well.
Yeah. This was just a good performance, just a very coherent pressure performance and against a very different kind of opponent to Davy Grant.
Yeah.
I mean, Castaneda is pretty, but also much more controlled.
Yeah.
It's sharper, straighter puncher, much less likely to give things away than Grant. Grant's whole style is giving things away.
Yep.
It's giving things away to trick you into thinking that
Yes.
he's giving them away for free.
Yes.
But instead it's some giant looping shot that's going to come around the one that you're trying to counter that's
Right.
going to get you.
Which is why a super sharp, super fast, and powerful boxer like Adrian Yanez had a really tough fight with Davy Grant. He couldn't resist. He's like, oh, the counter's right there. And then he would get fucking wanged to the body with some massive hook that came from 5 feet outside his line of sight. Yeah. Castaneda does not create a complete mess in that way, but he is similarly scrappy to Davy Grant. Throws lots of combinations. And I thought right from the outset, Marcos had the right idea. He wanted to pressure Castaneda. I think that is the thing that works against him. But even he didn't have to pour on pressure like mad the entire fight because he was simply in good positions. This is what I really like about Marcos's game, and this makes him another young fighter who I think shows an understanding of fighting that is really belies his age and experience. that he could simply maintain the distance, take a small step to one side or the other, or a short step back, facing Castaneda the entire time, unlike Cannonier against Imavov, and just make him miss. And when Castaneda would set up something from too far away and take a big step in, Marcos could just run him into a jab or run him into a straight right hand. Small step to the outside, line the shot up, and then pivot, and you've reset very efficiently. And then the fight got a little nuts, which I also enjoyed. It sort of became a dick measuring contest in round 2, and so I thought we had a little bit of everything. I like to see both of those things. Positional masterclass and who's harder. I like both.
Yeah, it was cool. Like, that's exactly what you want to see from a fight. You want to see people trying to control the fight and then trying to take it back when they can't.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of that, I mean, has to do with Castaneda just being such a scrappy maniac. He definitely very clearly lost the first round, and he was just trying to mix it up with whatever he could cook up in round 2. He went for a couple nice takedowns. He was trying to counter from strange, weird angles, mixed in his high kicks. Castaneda has a really good, really sneaky high kick. And he basically persuaded Marcos to get a little crazy with him. And then I thought Marcos did a pretty good job pulling it back in round 3. Went back to jab mode, maintaining distance, countering, and being defensively responsible. Again, something I do not see from many young fighters is somebody who is like, you know, there are a lot of fighters who are too willing to be defensive because their defense isn't actually good. It doesn't leave them in good positions to answer when they need to. It gives the opponent too much momentum. But it is very possible to simply like play solid and stay ahead. You're beating the other guy, you're ahead, make him work for it, and you're going to catch him. And I like seeing that Marcos has the flexibility and the basic understanding of what positions he's safe in and what positions he's not safe in to pull that off, to take his foot off the gas without the fight spinning out of control. I just think he's really good in a sort of sometimes unremarkable way. He's just like solid.
Yep. Just like clearly just a very good fighter. Like, you know, just knows how to win. He's like Lerone Murphy or someone like that, except that he's, for some reason, like buried on the prelims despite being undefeated.
Yeah, undefeated. Has now beaten, I think he was on his way to beating Alrichi Lang in his last fight too, and then there was a groin kick that ended that fight in the second round. But that's basically, you know, as far as I see it, 2.5 wins over blue names on Wikipedia, serious opponents.
Yep.
And he should be getting like some fringe ranked bookings soon. Shit, do Marcos versus Adrian Yanez. Maybe not immediately.
Yeah,
but
why not?
It sounds cool, right?
Yeah.
He could be Marcos.
Yeah, there's a ton of great.
Marcos could be our new Rafael Assunção. My new Rafael Assunção. A guy who fits into the bantamweight picture not because he's as crazy and devastating as the rest of them, but because he knows how to handle those guys without getting overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah, very happy to see more of him. And, you know, in some ways, just that little bit more aggressive than Rafael Assunção.
Oh, certainly.
As well. If you make him
certainly.
If you make him be that guy, he will go for it.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, in round 3, he was being a little more defensive, saying, okay, bring it, Castaneda. You think you're going to draw me into a scrap? And then he like slips a big left hand from Castaneda and just sits him on his ass with a beautiful straight right hand. You know, you got to see him showing multiple ways of responding to an opponent trying to get crazy and create a war. And, yeah, I think Assunção probably did that more when he was younger as well. He really became a very staid, purely solid fighter later in his career.
That's two very different, extremely scrappy fighters to be able to beat. Dave Grant and Castaneda is two like very different tests in both quite similar. Like, you know, it's still bantamweight. They're still, you know, punching violent guys. That's generally who people tend to be at bantamweight, but yeah, it's impressive that he's still able to control people like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to see him continue to develop.
Hmm?
All right. Well, I think that'll do it for this week's Heavy Hands. I am going to try to dig up Pettis Horiguchi 2. Sounds like it was a great fight. Neither of us were going to be up at 5 a.m. or whatever it was, paying $20 to watch it. And it's very difficult to find after the fact. I may just buy it and then see if I can get it to Phil somehow. But if I can scrounge up a convenient copy, maybe we can talk about that next week for a bonus episode on the Patreon.
It's good to me.
Check out the Patreon, by the way. I did a couple weeks ago now, a week and a half ago or something. Miguel Class returned, joined me to talk about sumo. There was a big grand sumo tournament in the back half of May, and we had a good time talking about that. And we'll be back to do that once more next month in July. There's one every 2 months. Yep. That's it. Find us on Twitter at Ava Greg Jackson. That's Phil. At Boxing Bush. That's me. And next week we'll be back to talk to you about. Oh God.
Whitaker Chimaev.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're almost through this sour spell.
Wait until that McGregor versus Chandler pay-per-view.
Yeah, I mean,
it's definitely still going to be a pay-per-view, and it's definitely still going to be called McGregor versus Chandler.
Whatever is going on there. But then after that, and including this Whitaker Chimaev card, which is pretty damn strong, actually, I think we're back to a schedule where the fights actually, as of now, look largely kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank fucking God. Because it's been a rough couple weeks in UFC land. Anyway, we'll be back next
Inshallah.
week. We will be back, inshallah, to talk to you about that next week. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of Face Punch and you came to the right place, this has been Heavy Hands.